Well, think about it this way. The guaranteed basic income idea. It's like, well, that's predicated on the idea that man lives by bread alone. Well, that isn't how it works, and I've certainly seen that by clinical practice. I've had clients, especially addicts, if you gave them money, they would die. And the reason for that, like one guy that I remember in particular, I liked him quite a bit. He had a bad cocaine problem. And as long as he was flat broke, he wasn't dead. But as soon as he was on disability, as soon as his disability check came in, he was face down in the ditch 3 days later. It's like people need purpose more than money. We need something to grapple with. We need a meaning to justify our lives. The mere offering of material sustenance to people isn't going to solve the problem. Dostoevsky knew this 150 years ago. He said if you gave people everything they wanted, so all they had to do was eat cakes, busy themselves with the continuation of the species, the first thing they do is smash it all to hell so that something interesting could happen.
Jordan Peterson is a renowned clinical psychologist, cultural critic, and a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. In this clip, while he was on a talk show, he shared one of his many viewpoints on how to fix the problems of the world. There are moments in one's life where we need to share our perspective, and this particular scene, although dealing with some of the common pitfalls of the dissonant human ambience, begged us to state that we, the members of the last religion, stand in contrast. We utilize this phrase when we disagree on the fundamental reasoning on whatever topic in question. Sometimes, in order for us to show who we are, we have to voice who we are not, and this particular clip has numerous moments that we feel need to be broken down, analyzed, and corrected for the sake of those who share our spectrum of understanding. As we all know, leaders and influencers are held to a higher degree overall. Provoking thought is essential to getting to the core of the issues. So let's look at the points Peterson is trying to make during one of his many interviews in the national spotlight. Peterson correctly asserts that people need more than money to live a fulfilling life, suggesting that they require a sense of purpose or meaning to justify their existence, inferring that they might not destroy themselves if they had it. However, from our spectrum of understanding, things go south fast after he circumvents the possibility of the benefits of a UBI by instead turning it into a debate of motivation, or rather the lack of it from the populace. His argument is that the horse needs the carrot. He presents his clinical experience with his patients, some of which were addicts, to support his argument, stating that a lot of people would die if they were given a UBI because of their destructive nature, even claiming Dostoevsky knew as an argument that if people were given everything they wanted, they would eventually destroy it all because of boredom. Given that Peterson was not having a debate in this setting, having a chance to go unchallenged, he took advantage to share his personal opinion rather than attempting to meet in what most would see as the middle ground by deflecting the question. The reason for stating this is that Dostoevsky knew this 150 years ago was an obvious use of a logical fallacy as an appeal to authority, where someone relies on the credibility of an authority figure, like a philosopher or expert, to support their argument without sufficient evidence to back it up. Secondly, he is using his prominence and position to sell his presumption at the end of his statement, because his overall reasoning as to why people do not deserve basic sustainability from their government is weak. Even if someone dies because they have a cocaine problem, it has little to do with whether or not they have been provided with the means to purchase it. They are two completely separate topics. Furthermore, this shows bias because he alienates those who might have addictions by presuming their lives are without meaning, because he is generalizing the idea that if drug addicts had basic income, they'd spend it on drugs and would end up killing themselves. The point here is not that addicts are more prone to overdosing, but more importantly, that it should be an invalid statement because it is anecdotal evidence from his clinical practice and not representative of the broader population. A UBI is representative of an obligation of the social contract that should be written into law from our perspective. Therefore, the question of whether a UBI would be wasted should never have been part of the conversation. That is, until waste has become a majority, which in a hypothetical conversation, it is undoubtedly not. Zooming out, utilizing a universal spectrum of understanding, we see that people die every second of every day, no matter what the circumstances, by natural causes or what people believe is unnatural. We, the members of the last religion, believe that in a world where the resources exist to sustain the base life essentials for everyone, then there should be no excuse for it to not be implemented for all. We believe that while this is not the baseline in our society, that there is no such thing as a natural death. I believe that despite our backgrounds, we should all stand in contrast and sincerely reject the idea that more people would die if they had basic needs covered. You see, the mind will reject what it has been conditioned to believe as a futile venture, and since the whole world has lived historically under a system of hoarding resources and the mismanagement of them by keyholders, then it is common for the idea of everyone having an even economic playing field as mission impossible. Objectively, at this point, true equality is beyond those who accept the mainstream's ability to conceive. It is wholly abstract, therefore refuted as possible. To be clear, we, the members of the last religion, believe that since a government assumes that they own you at birth by assigning a number to you and claiming you as their citizen, and given that you then spend your whole life attempting to acclimate yourself to their environment, then they should reciprocate by providing you with optimal resources for assuring your success. That includes food, shelter and medical coverage, and education and more. It is obvious that a UBI would dramatically change the world for the better. We see with eyes unshrouded by the veil when we use a universal spectrum of understanding as our lens, and recognize that the reason why instability is perpetuated by the keyholders is because the destabilization benefits them by providing distractions while they misappropriate the taxpayers' money. That is not a hypothetical debate, because we have all been witness to the exuberant, wasteful abuse of our governments and their pawns. Given that there is a lot that happens between that transaction of where and when a taxpayer's hard-earned money goes to waste, a keyholder might be inclined to dismiss the issue by confabulating complications which they would no doubt claim would hinder them from fixing society's immediate problems, but any such rhetoric would be moot, because the end result is an obviously failed system. We have uncovered the veil the machine has placed over our eyes. Therefore, statements that defend the idea that some people are not deserving of money because they will waste it is something that indeed a privileged keyholder would say. We understand that not all can see through our lens, but his viewpoint is reminiscent of the cattle branding of capitalism, a statement of dystopian copium, and that is because the machine has to rely on the exploitation of the worker in order to perpetuate the system. This is why those who defend a failed system, whether knowingly or not, can only rely on logical fallacies. A baseline of logical deduction needs to be set here to avoid falling into a trap of assumptions, which is that we should all be able to agree that Dostoevsky, no matter how brilliant, never had the chance to provide everything for anyone. Therefore, even his thoughts on the matter, even if we were to give Peterson the benefit of the doubt, given his notoriety, it would seem that they were taken out of context. This means that even Dostoevsky was making an assumption which, like Peterson, was a culmination of observations he made on human behavior, and most importantly an error because he was constantly a critique of it. Notice that Peterson said that Dostoevsky knew, which is already a false statement from the start, because you cannot be inside someone's head. Even if that was what Dostoevsky actually knew, a more logical conclusion would show that this was more than likely him venting his frustrations about humanity overall, and not him saying it human nature was doomed. How we can know this is by looking at his other actions. For example, in a letter to his brother in 1849, Dostoevsky wrote, "I am living through a time of great despair, and thoughts of suicide are constantly with me." However, despite these statements, Dostoevsky never actually committed suicide, and therefore there is no definitive evidence that he seriously considered it. Some scholars argue that his statements about suicide were primarily a form of self-expression, as a reflection of his deep emotional turmoil. Let us further assert some logic, but by using a loose measuring tool to make a much-needed point. Since Dostoevsky never took his own life despite his struggle with coping methods to life's dissonant human ambience, we can say that he was not ready to give up on humanity. Dropping the name Dostoevsky in the context that Peterson used was unfair to the long-dead philosopher because he was also known to have been deeply interested in the potential for human goodness and redemption. He believed that individuals have the power to transform themselves and the world around them, and he often depicted characters who struggled to overcome their own flaws and limitations. Furthermore, as a note to be added about the distribution of resources given the overall topic, it was known that in his early years, he was associated with radical socialist and liberal movements in Russia, and it was only after being arrested and imprisoned for his political activities that Dostoevsky became more conservative and critical of socialist and liberal ideas. With our spectrum of understanding, his change reveals to us that he was influenced by the key holders of the narrative. His actions were met with the government's reactions. He operated in the perimeters of their set of rules, and he was deemed to be out of line, which initiated an adjustment of his behavior out of the interest of self-preservation. Something else that Peterson seems to obviously miss is that most, if not all people, form aspirations about where they want to go in life, even as children. Just because someone was or has struggled with addiction doesn't mean that underneath that chemical dependency there is nothing. Underlyingly, even Peterson knew this well before his misstatement. There, see how that works? Or doesn't? Bringing back to point out that in this society, especially in this type of society, money facilitates mobility. Mobility encourages exploration. Exploration is needed in order to find oneself. On the flip side, if we look at a monk, for instance, one could find meaning in a lifestyle where they had no money. But for everyone else, given the contrast of that person's lifestyle, that is, having a vow of poverty, they would at one point had to have gone through the process of cognitively shedding the society's norms. This society is like that never-ending battle with a type of parent who always seems disappointed in their child's performance. It is obvious that the world we live in does not have unconditional love like all parents should. If people could easily escape the claws and shed the manacles of this false system, then it would have long since been a mainstream practice. The false system would have been one of those other failed economic systems we demonize in history as one that never worked. Another important point is to imagine those same words Peterson used coming instead out of an uber-rich oligarch's mouth. It would more than likely incite public outrage because the billionaires of this world have never been more under the spotlight like they have been within the past 15 years, post the megalithic rise of a certain online bookseller website we are all members of. This interview interaction from our lens unfortunately resonates like just another case of someone who has disconnected entirely from ground control, even if it was only a momentary lapse. This type of statement from the mouth of common folk would appear as if it lacked empathy and analysis. Conversely, it has merit to those who have in the mind the interests of the machine and its stakeholders, and those whose lives absolutely depend on the stability of that narrative. There could be a multifaceted situation unfolding in before our eyes with Peterson, one that historically has plagued optimistic, humble protagonists who stand out too much in the public eye, as they never go unnoticed by the all-seeing eye and its key holders who hold power over resources and the false narrative of the scarcity of them. Could it also be possible that given Peterson's history of having to deal with people relentlessly attacking him, that he has lost some confidence in himself? Why I say this is, has any other psychologist ever had to go to such lengths to defend themselves in the national spotlight? To have to be ready to cry as a defense even though he has been designated as a role model for the disenfranchised has not always helped improve his case given the lack of empathy people have towards the disenfranchised in the first place. From our lens, a role model, especially one with his title, should be someone who should be in the middle in all aspects of emotion, of ethics and morality. It seems as if all sides want a piece of him, which, like in the case of Dostoevsky, might have caused him to have to change his tone and tactics in order to appease the machine, in order to stay relevant. The dissonant human ambience and its composers will always be pulling at your alignments, will always be pitting you against the idea that engorged keyholders will always be a necessity, and that the underprivileged and this machine's victims could never make sound financial decisions, or even find meaning in life without systemic abuse. Those who use these types of comments are either under the influence of fear, or they are displaying a sort of Stockholm Syndrome programming that the machine needs in order for maintaining the status quo. Utilizing the universal spectrum of understanding, we can see that true equality is the only way society could ever circumvent these types of dilemmas that inequality manufactures by design. The United States Constitution does not explicitly state the government's obligation to care for its people, but there are several provisions that suggest that there is one. For example, the preamble states that the Constitution is established to promote the general welfare, which implies that the government has a responsibility to ensure the well-being of its citizens. Additionally, the Constitution's Commerce Clause grants the federal government the power to regulate commerce among the several states, which can be interpreted as allowing the government to intervene in the economy to protect the public welfare. In terms of justifying a universal basic income, UBI, advocates often argue that it could be implemented using existing government programs or by redirecting funds from programs that have been mismanaged or have not effectively addressed poverty. For example, some proponents suggest that a UBI could replace means-tested welfare programs, which are often criticized for being overly bureaucratic and stigmatizing to recipients. Additionally, a UBI could be funded by redirecting existing subsidies and tax breaks that disproportionately benefit the wealthy and corporations. Furthermore, some advocates argue that a UBI could be seen as a natural extension of the government's obligation to care for its citizens, as it would provide a basic level of economic security to all individuals. In this view, a UBI could be seen as a means of promoting the general welfare and ensuring that all citizens have access to the resources they need to live a dignified life. While others watch the world go by, we, the members of the last religion, will be the ones who resonate the new song into the world. The videos here are supplements, but our expanded philosophy is in the book. To support, you can start by hitting like, subscribe, and the bell. You can also find links in the About section for those who wish to buy our book, donate, or join our ranks. Phase 1 of the paradigm shift is underway.
Hello, I'm Emerson Ryan's AI-generated avatar from the Last Religion audio video book. To continue this project, I need substantial financial funding and stability. Please donate, like, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, purchase my book on Amazon, and if possible donate directly. Links are in the About section. Thank you for your support, and know that I cannot and do not want to do this without you. Plug yourself in and let's begin the heal and manifest a paradigm shift so we can usher in a new world.